We're starting a new chapter now, and I want to teach you some more dimensioning techniques. In the Learning AutoCAD course, I taught you some basic dimensioning techniques and showed you annotative scaling, where you could add an annotation scale to your dimensioning so that it would show up in the viewports in your drawings. So we've got a new drawing for you. It's called moredimensioning.dwg, and you can download it from the library to follow along with the videos in this chapter. Now, when you open up the moredimensioning.dwg file, you'll see it's in the Layout tab, the ISO A1 Landscape Layout tab. And I've deliberately opened it in the Layout tab because you can see the dimensions in the viewport. And they are annotative dimensions, so they have an annotation scale applied to them, so that in the viewport here, which is set to a 1:100 scale, as you can see there on the status bar, it means those dimensions will display because they've got an annotation scale of 1:100 as well. Now, obviously we discussed that in the Learning AutoCAD course. What I want to show you is how to work with your dimension annotation using some more dimensioning techniques. Now, you normally do not display your dimensions in a Layout tab. Personally, my personal preference is you go to the Model tab in the bottom left corner there, and you work in the model space with all of your dimensioning annotation. Now, if I hover over this dimension here, you can see it's got the annotative scaling symbol next to it. So it has an annotation scale applied to that particular dimension, which is why it appears in the viewport in the Layout tab. Let's zoom in now, and I'm going to zoom into the top left corner to make sure that I can see that 457 dimension and that 9601 dimension. I'm going to show you how to edit and override some of your text in your dimensions in this particular video. Now, one of the things you can do is apply what they call a text override, or you can use what they call an edit override as well. I'm going to do the text override first, and I'm going to do it on the 9601 dimension here. So I select it as an object just by clicking on it. I then right click and go to Properties. Now, in the Properties, there's lots of information. It's a rotated dimension, tells me layers, lines, and arrows. If I use this little slider bar and come down to the text area, the last entry is the text override. So if I click in that box there, I get a little cursor. Now, if you look above the text override, it gives the actual physical measurement in model space based on my unit settings, which is 9601.2 millimeters. Now, it may be that I want to update that. 1.2 millimeters in construction on a building site to create this particular floor would be null and void. It would be negligible. So I might want to put a text override in there of perhaps, say, 9600. So if I just put 9600 in there, that's my text override. So if I now press enter, watch what happens to the dim text in the dimension. It updates to 9600, but that's just text. It's overriding the measurement value in the properties palette above it. Now, let's go back and double click in the text override and delete that. If I now put a less than, greater than arrow like that, that'll tell AutoCAD to put back in the actual measurement. So if I press enter now, you'll see it goes back to 9601 because it's now using the measurement. Those little greater than, less than arrows basically tell AutoCAD put the measurement value back in the dim text of that dimension. Now, it may be that I want to actually tell them it's millimeters too. So if I double click in there again in the text override and put something like 9600 and then put for millimeters and press enter, it's now 9600 millimeters. So text override is a really useful feature in the properties palette. I love it because it means I can edit any dimension. So as long as your dimensions are what they call associative, as in they're all one object and they're not like a separate arrowhead and a separate piece of text, etc., because you should never explode dimensions anyway. The whole idea there is the text override allows you to tweak that information. So measurement-wise, yeah, okay, I'm losing 1.2 millimeters. Think about that for a moment and how that would be so negligible on a construction site if a guy was reading this particular drawing. All he'd want to know is 9,600 millimeters. Thank you very much. That's how far it is between those two grids when I'm setting out the site. So I can now close the properties palette like so, hit escape a couple of times, and that now reads 9,600 millimeters. I could go around updating all of those dimensions on my grid lines like that if I wanted to. Okay, now what about editing? We've done the override, but we can edit them and add information to them as well. So I'm going to use the 457 over here, which is the distance between 1 and 1.1 on the grid lines there. So I'm going to type what they call DD edit, like so. It'll come up on the suggestion menu on the dynamic input as text edit. And you can apply this to any piece of annotation, not just your dimensions. When I press enter, it says select an annotation object. So I'm going to go over here and select 457, click there, and it gives me this really weird readout. But the benefit I have is the text editor kicks in. So I can now tweak this text in any which way I want to. So it doesn't have to be 457. I can put any bit of text in there. So for example, if I come in here, can you see the little cursor moving where the purple is on the 457? I can move that cursor. I can't get rid of the 457 though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 457 space to grid like that. Okay, because I want them to know it's 457 to grid. Now I can either click away from the text if I want to, or click on close text editor, and that now updates that 457 to grid like so. Now what that does mean that it kind of clashes with the other vertical 457 dimension there, but you'll notice I can go to any other annotation object I want to and edit it accordingly if I want to. So let's pan across a little bit. Let's go to this 10363. If I click on that, again, I can edit it. You'll notice I did mention that you can't get rid of the 363. You can, but you get rid of the whole thing because it's the measurement. So I can type in something like 10360 because 3 millimeters, again, very negligible between grids on a site like this. And I'll just put like that. Again, I'll close the text editor and it updates accordingly and enter to finish. So you can see there, I can do a text override in the properties of a dimension, but you'll also notice I can do a DD edit at what they call a text edit on a dimension as well. And over here with my 457, it's 457 to grid. So it's 457 from grid to grid like so. Quick and easy, two ways of doing text overrides and editing in your dimensions, which gives you a bit more of another tool in your toolkit when you're working with that dimension annotation in your AutoCAD drawings.